There is an old saying, beautiful girls sleep with bad boys. What could I say? Could I agree? Yes, I could, because many residents of our Scandinavian capital considered me, Lucas Larson, a very bad boy when I met a very beautiful girl named Rebecca Lindberg. Rumors about my trip to South America earned me the silly nickname Bandido, although in my opinion, Robin Hood would have been much more appropriate because I stole from the rich and gave to the poor, which, as it turned out, was me. It all started when the company I worked for went bankrupt, and my job and planned 2-week trip with friends to Kos, a party island in Greece, became history because my salary and vacation pay were likely to be delayed for a long time. My friends left for Greece, and I stayed home and tried to solve my problems during a wild night at one of the local bars. Of course, that night ended in complete disaster. Even the infamous party girl nicknamed Last Chance believed I was too drunk and rejected my attempts to sleep with her. Feeling like a piece of shit, I was walking back to my one-room apartment on the outskirts of town when a stupid idea popped into my head that changed my life. Our local newspaper had blown up a non-story about one of our local councilors taking his wife on an expensive trip to Australia and New Zealand, paid for by taxpayers, to look at some completely unimportant things. We discussed it in the bar that evening, and the general opinion was that it was corruption. Passing by his expensive house, I said to myself in my drunken stupor that since he had spent my tax money on an expensive trip with his wife, and I, a poor taxpayer, couldn't afford to go anywhere, he owed me a vacation. To my surprise, there was no alarm system in his house, and within a few minutes I found myself inside the empty house. In his home office, I saw an old large safe and, to my great surprise, found a bunch of keys in a desk drawer. The largest of the keys was for the safe. Even in my drunken state, I was surprised when I opened the safe and found a thick brown envelope with German stamps, which were still their currency at the time. In the kitchen, I found a plastic bag from a grocery store, put my loot in it, and left the house. No one saw me on my way home, and when I woke up the next morning, I felt terrible remorse when I realized what had happened during the night. Now, looking back with a clear mind, I realized that there was only one thing I could have done if I wanted to use my loot for the only pleasure in my life: run as fast as I could. Sooner or later, the police would have found me because they already had my fingerprints from when I stole a car at 15, and during yesterday's raid, I didn't bother to leave any fingerprints. I put the money for rent and other bills for the next month in an envelope on the kitchen table, packed my passport, the essentials for a traveler, and my new treasure in my backpack. My journey began with a bus to a neighboring town where I took a train to Copenhagen, Denmark, and then another train to Hamburg, Germany. After opening a bank account in Hamburg, I got a Visa card. The next train took me to Frankfurt, where I opened a new account and got a MasterCard. If the police were looking for me, they were probably expecting me to join my friends in Greece. Or if they found out I was traveling with a backpack, they would have contacted their colleagues in Thailand, Australia, and New Zealand, which are popular destinations for Scandinavian tourists. But I went in the opposite direction, flying from Madrid, Spain, to Buenos Aires, Argentina, in South America. I spent a few wonderful days in Buenos Aires, where I found a hotel with lots of tourists and met 2 Canadian travelers. A few days later, a German guy joined us, and the 4 of us decided to travel across the continent together. We had a great time in exotic places, although the Canadian girls promised their boyfriends back home to remain faithful, and they even kept their promise. My German friend Arnold and I accepted their loyalty and made no serious attempts to seduce them, because it was easy for us to find exotic local girls at our stops during the trip. 6 weeks later, when the Canadian girls left our group to return home, they agreed to send me a few letters from Toronto, which I hoped would intrigue anyone who wanted to find me. Time flies when you're having fun, and one day, when even Arnold had gone home, I realized I had been on the road for 3 months. Thanks to my cheap backpacker lifestyle, my finances were still in decent shape, so I decided to spend most of my remaining money on a few exotic and comfortable expensive tours for the last part of my stay in South America. No dream can last forever. And one day I found myself back home. My family had paid my rent and bills, so everything seemed fine in my apartment. Of course, I expected the police to want to talk to me soon. When the doorbell rang, I opened the door and saw a casually dressed man in his 30s. He introduced himself and, saying that we had important business, entered my apartment. He said, "I work for our congressman and want to ask you if you understand that you have serious, very serious problems." "I don't know what you're talking about, absolutely nothing." He shook his head and continued, "I know the congressman knows, and the police know that you're a thief who was in the congressman's office. You're in trouble, and I'm the only one who can help you. Choose, cooperate or rot in jail." I feared the worst and replied, "Why do you want to help me?" "I don't want to help you, but I work for the deputy and he asked me to do this. Do as I say and you'll save yourself a lot of trouble." I was surprised because the deputy should have been the last person on earth who could help me. I asked, "Why would the deputy sheriff help me?" "Because you didn't find the keys to his safe and the only thing you stole from him was a small amount of local currency from his desk drawer, which you spent on gambling and probably won back somewhere. Not a word about the German marks in the safe. Is that clear?" It was a really strange offer, but I had no complaints or objections, and he left my apartment. Obviously, the deputy was involved in some dirty business that he didn't want to bring to light. The only reason I can talk about this today is that a few years later, he was involved in some kind of economic scandal, and his party convinced him to resign from his position as deputy, finding him a new well-paid job with a humanitarian organization in Africa. He was dismissed, as usual, but now he lives a comfortable life in Thailand. However, a week after the deputy's assistant visited me, the police came to my house, and since the deputy was involved in the case, my trial took place only 3 months after my return home. I pleaded guilty, and the trial was over in less than half an hour. I was sentenced to 80 hours of community service and a small compensation payment to the deputy. I did not appeal the sentence. I was supposed to work in a church, and my boss was supposed to be a cleaner. He called me, and we met as agreed. He was clearly not too happy to see me because he greeted me with the words, "Hello, welcome. I'm a cleaner, not a prison guard, so you can choose what you want to do. You can work with me or sit in the storeroom and read books or magazines. It's up to you. I doubt anyone will pay any attention to you." I replied, "Working with you will be fine." Eric was a cheerful guy, and we worked well together, doing various cleaning and gardening jobs in the church, the small cemetery around the church, the administrative building, and the vicar's house. Every day at 11 o'clock, we took a coffee break in the administrative building with the people who worked there. To my great delight, I met a nice girl there. Her name was Rebecca, and she had taken a 6-month temporary job in the church administration. Soon we started chatting very pleasantly during our coffee breaks. A few days later, Eric, the cleaner, found out that she didn't have a boyfriend and started teasing me for not asking her out on a date. I didn't expect her to want to go out with me, but she agreed and the date went very well. I started to believe that the old saying that beautiful girls sleep with bad boys was based on real facts, and Rebecca gave me the impression that she really wanted sex. I got a new movie from a friend who bought a DVD in Thailand that hadn't been released in our country yet. Rebecca and I watched the movie at my apartment, cuddled up on the couch. After a few kisses, she told me that she wasn't the kind of girl who had sex on the first date. But if she met the right guy and fell in love with him, and he with her, no one would blame them if they gave in to the temptation to make love. It took some time to convince her that I was truly in love with her, which was the absolute truth, and she gave up all attempts to resist. However, whether it was true or not, she really wanted to see me again as soon as possible. For a fairly short time, Rebecca and I were considered a couple, but her parents were not happy at all, and a year later, they became even more unhappy when their beautiful daughter became pregnant by a guy nicknamed Bandido. Rebecca wanted to keep the baby, and neither of us ever uttered the word abortion. Our parents arranged a small wedding, and we started our family life in a two-room apartment in a fairly nice neighborhood. Eric left the church and started his own kitchen renovation business. After just a few months, he offered me a job with good conditions, and I accepted. Rebecca was now working for an insurance company headquartered in our city. Now that we both had good jobs and were living on the same level as most of our friends, we could start looking for a house. We soon discovered that due to complicated rules and tax breaks, a new house would be cheaper than an old one, so we bought one in a new neighborhood where most of our neighbors were our age, and we even made a lot of new friends. Now we were a happy Scandinavian VVV family, Villa Volvo Volv. Volv is a child's word for dog. Our second child was on the way, and the love between Rebecca and me was stronger than ever. When our second child, Oscar, turned 2, we sent both children to kindergarten, and Rebecca returned to work. The first few years after she returned to work went well for the whole family until she got her first promotion, had less time for the family, and demanded that we divide all household responsibilities equally. Eric's wife, who held a senior position in the county administration, was offered a very well-paid job in the EU administration in Brussels, Belgium. Eric decided to go with her and offered to sell me his company at a fair price, which I accepted. This meant more work for me and caused some problems in my marriage when Rebecca refused to do her share of the housework under various pretexts, leaving me with up to 70% of the family responsibilities in some weeks. It was a difficult time for me. I sat at home in the evenings doing administrative work, looking after 2 children and a dog, while Rebecca went to the gym every Monday and met up with friends on Fridays after work. On other evenings, she might have activities that she considered very important, such as wine tasting, theater, movies, and dinners with friends. Since clothing was an important and expensive part of Rebecca's life at the time, she spent many Saturdays shopping with her friends and Sundays with her parents. She didn't have much time left for her family. Every marriage has important dates, and I still consider October 25th to be the day when everything went wrong. When Rebecca came home from work that day, she told me she was going to the theater with friends and expected me to take care of the kids that evening, even though she knew I had to finish a very complicated calculation for an important client. I begged her to help me with the kids and walk the dog so I could focus on my important work. Even though she had spent the entire previous week with her friends, on this particular evening, when I really needed her help, she refused to stay home. I nearly lost my temper when she told me what play she was going to see, because just 2 weeks earlier, she had refused to go with me to see the same play, even though I had gotten 2 tickets from a satisfied client. Rebecca angrily replied that she would never waste her time on such nonsense. Then she dropped a bombshell, saying, "It's my turn to host a party tonight. I promised my friends we'd meet here and have a drink before the theater." I was confused when I asked, "Who's coming?" "5 girls and 4 guys, we have 10 tickets." Now I was furious, and for the first time in our entire marriage, I yelled at her and cursed her. "Hell no! No damn bachelorette parties in my house when I'm working so hard for this family. I wasn't good enough to go with you to that damn play, and now you're going to watch it with some fucking gigolos? Are your damn office boyfriends so much better than me? Obviously they are. Since you'd rather watch that damn play with some fucking gigolos than with me, don't worry about me. I'm just your husband, at least for now. Rest assured, I won't let any perverts into my house tonight, and they'll be thrown out in disgrace if they dare set foot in this house. You can check." I raised my voice to a shout. "Take your damn friends and lovers and go to hell and stay there. I don't miss you, and I'm sure the kids don't either because they hardly know you." My outburst frightened her, and she began to sob. "I'm a faithful wife. I don't have a lover." Our children started crying loudly, and Rebecca ran to our bedroom where I could hear her talking on her cell phone. But I didn't care what she was doing. I calmed the children down, and they made me promise that Mom and Dad wouldn't get divorced. At least not yet. When Rebecca returned 10 minutes later, she said she would stay home and take care of the children that evening. She did so without saying a word to me, and I was able to write a proposal that was attractive to both my new big client and me. The next evening, she stayed home too, and when the kids were asleep, I said to her, "We need to have a serious talk about what happened yesterday. You know I don't own you, and I have no right to demand that you take care of the kids and me. It's up to you to decide what's more important to you, your friends at parties or us. But if they are more important to you, then we'd better break up as soon as possible so that you are free to do whatever you want and sleep with whomever you want. I will never accept cheating. You can hide it for a while, but rest assured that sooner or later everything will come out, and you will be fired. So it's much better for us to break up now, while I don't know anything, and remain friends." She started crying and sobbing. "I love you. Only you and the children, and I swear I never cheated on you and never intended to." In that case, there's no point in discussing this any further. 2 weeks later, I got the contract and was able to hire a good guy named Elias, and just 3 weeks later, I even hired his former colleague Thomas, who was unemployed. The only weak link was still the administration, but then I was recommended a young mother who wanted to work part-time. I offered her 15 hours a week, and 5 minutes after our meeting, Julia was hired. Now we were a successful team at my company. Our marriage remained cold for almost a month. Rebecca was promoted shortly after our fight and began spending much less time with her old bachelor friends. To my great delight, she spent more time at home with the children, but even more time working overtime with her new colleagues. Rebecca, who was now earning good money and not involved in my business, seriously doubted my ability to run a company with 3 employees, so she demanded that we divide our property in half. I didn't object, even when she offered to let me keep our house as my private property. It wasn't a big sacrifice for her, as we had taken out a huge mortgage on the house. For a couple of years, we were happy in our marriage again, and since we were both earning good money, we enjoyed wonderful family vacations in faraway exotic places such as the Bahamas, Bali, Thailand, and South Africa. During these trips, away from work and other interests, we were a truly happy family. But nothing lasts forever. Rebecca's work days became longer again, and now she even had to stay overnight at the district offices and attend additional courses and seminars, as she was hoping for another promotion. My business was thriving, and we were booked up well in advance. When Julia left her cheating boyfriend, I increased her working hours to full-time so she could take on more client contacts, which she did very well. I can't deny that I really liked Julia, but we never tried to take things too far because neither of us was interested in cheating. Although Rebecca spent a lot of time traveling, I never had any reason to suspect her of cheating or try to check up on her. Until that awful day when our dog tried to tell me something was wrong. Rebecca called to say she would be late, and I got home before the kids. The dog greeted me at the door as usual, but barked unusually and ran upstairs to the spare bedroom. When I opened the door, she ran inside and barked at the bed. Of course, I found this a little strange and even feared the worst before looking around the room, but found nothing of interest. The dog, a very intelligent Labrador, kept trying to tell me something, but despite my best efforts, I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I even checked the laundry, but found nothing suspicious. When Rebecca came home around 8 in the evening, I immediately noticed something strange about her. In the morning, she was wearing a knee-length skirt and black tights, but now she was wearing light brown tights. Of course, I wasn't 100% sure, and something could have happened to her black tights during the day, and she had a spare pair at the office. I simply asked her, "Were you home this afternoon?" For a moment, fear flashed across her face, and she asked, "No. Why do you ask?" "Because the dog was acting a little strange, as if something had happened during the day." "Are you accusing me of doing something to the dog?" "Did I say that? I just asked politely if you were home." "My answer is no. Did you ask the kids?" "Yes." "Maybe a stray dog that was near the house teased her." I felt awkward, but I couldn't deny that I had some doubts about whether Rebecca was telling the truth. So I decided to be very careful, but keep my eyes open for now. The next morning, when I found out that Rebecca and the children had left the house, I felt like an idiot when I returned home and did what I had been thinking about when I couldn't sleep the night before. I took the last 2 plastic bags out of the trash can and took them to the garage to look at them. The first one was empty, but in the second one I found black, slightly torn pantyhose and a bag that, judging by the label, contained brown pantyhose. I felt as if I had been hit with a baseball bat, and I had to sit down for a long time. My love and most of my dreams and hopes were shattered. The truth was cruel and unchanging. My wife had been unfaithful, and my marriage was a sham. When I returned to work, Elias and Thomas immediately noticed that something was wrong, and since there was no point in lying to them, I told them the truth. Elias called Julia, and after talking to her, he drove me to her house. She saw that I was in shock and laid me down on the couch. Apparently, I had been a good boss because they took good care of me on that terrible day. Elias drove to my house and cleaned out the garage. Julia called Rebecca and said that I had left unexpectedly to pick up an important part and had forgotten my cell phone at the office, but that I would be back later. Rebecca was unhappy, but agreed to look after the children. By evening, I was feeling much better, but my employees decided to hold a meeting at Julia's house, where they asked me about my plans. I told them that I had spent the whole day lying on Julia's couch thinking about it, and had decided to continue this charade with Rebecca until I found out more about her and planned my future, and then I would tell everyone at some event. 12 days passed after the dog incident before Rebecca mentioned that we hadn't had sex in a while, but she accepted my explanation that I was tired from work and that things would get better soon. Then my Labrador gave me another hint. During our long Sunday walk in the park, we encountered a couple of summer squirrels when the dog started barking and suddenly lunged forward, and I let go of the leash. To my surprise, my dog attacked the man, and it took me several seconds to pull the enraged dog away from the very angry man, who called the police and demanded that the dog be put down. I refused and told the police that the dog had never attacked anyone and that the man must have encountered the dog somewhere and done something bad to it. Of course, the dog was very friendly with the 2 police officers, and all they could do at that point was promise to investigate the matter. I took the man's business card and noticed that he worked for the same insurance company as Rebecca. When I got home, I told Rebecca that the dog had barked at a man who introduced himself as Gunder Nilsberg and asked if she knew him. She said no. I gave her Gunder's business card and said, "That's very strange. You should remember such an unusual name, especially since he knew you very well, considering that you work quite closely together." Rebecca turned pale before replying, "Of course I know Gunder Nilsberg, I'm sorry. I thought you said Gunnar Nilsson." She looked at me in surprise when I didn't continue the conversation. Why would I do that? Her lover was already in sight. What to do with him was another question. The next evening, Rebecca told me that she had been promoted again and that we had been invited to a company dinner on Friday to celebrate. The day after Rebecca told me about her promotion, she called me and said she would probably be home very late because she had investors coming in who needed a lot of information, and she would have to accompany her boss during the negotiations with the investors. I agreed without objection. Elias and Thomas decided to watch her office. They reported that Rebecca and a man in a suit left the building around 5 o'clock and got into a black BMW 500, which drove to a small restaurant where they stayed until 6:30. After that, they immediately drove to a neighboring town where there was an old hotel known for its discreet service. Elias reported that he had seen Rebecca in a second-floor window and that the light in the room was now off. He gave me the car's license plate number, and I sent an SMS to the National Vehicle Registry's automated service, which told me the owner's name, Jerry Silvergren. Even his last name was a bit unusual, so as a business owner, it was easy for me to get complete information about this man from the credit registries I subscribed to. He was married to Annette Silvergren. They had 2 children and another from a previous relationship. I promised to keep Julia informed, and neither she nor I could understand why Rebecca had turned into such a fool who slept with at least 2 of the company's top executives. The only explanation we could come up with was that morale at the company was low, otherwise she would never have gotten the new job, or that things were going so badly that she was now paying for her promotion at the hotel. Thomas called and asked if there was any reason they needed to stay longer. He had a plan, and I told him to go ahead but not to linger. Elias and he left when all 4 tires of the BMW had been punctured. Rebecca came home around 11 and went to bed without answering my question about whether they had managed to convince the investors to pay for the long hours. All she said was, "We'll see." She was a smart woman and probably understood that 2 incidents involving her lovers were too much for her marriage if she wanted to stay married. She knew that her lie about Nielsberg was a stupid mistake and that 4 flat tires were no accident. My only goal for the next week was to keep myself very busy and pretend that everything was fine between us. In the days leading up to the promotion dinner, she strangely had no important plans for the evenings, so Elias and Thomas did their best to distract me with sports and other activities. Rebecca was a little confused and asked me, "Why are you suddenly so interested in sports?" "Because I haven't had a chance to go anywhere in a long time. I've been sitting with the kids while you guys were out having fun. It would be silly of me to miss this week when I finally have a chance to spend time with my friends." She looked at me strangely but said nothing. On Thursday evening, I couldn't avoid having sex with her. The next morning, Rebecca told me not to work too late on this important day. I promised. I had a lot to do that day, so I had almost no time left for work. Julia did a great job with the task I gave her when she accompanied me to buy a new suit for dinner. I wanted to buy a suit from Armani, but Julia advised me to choose one of the best domestic brands, which would be more suitable for dinner, as Armani clothes could be seen by some people as a sign of insecurity. Rebecca was a very beautiful woman when she dressed up for the magnificent dinner. I believe that even she was a little impressed when she saw me in my new clothes, and she said, "I really have a very handsome husband." I thought to myself, yes, handsome, but not for long. The dinner was at the best hotel in town, and since Rebecca and I arrived early, we had plenty of time to talk, which was exactly what I had planned. Rebecca introduced me to the managing director and his wife, who said, "I don't think we've met before. It's a shame you've never been to one of our corporate dinners." I replied, "Only because I've never been invited." She looked at her husband angrily and asked, "Why? I want an explanation tonight." Blushing and angry, Rebecca pulled me aside and asked, "Did you really have to insult my boss and me the first time you walked in here?" "Insult you? It's your fault I didn't get an invitation. Why did you do that to me?" She said, "I'll be back in a minute," and left. While she was gone, I ran into an acquaintance, Gunder Nielsberg, who had been attacked by my dog. He came up to me with his wife and said, "Hello, my friend. Good to see you. Have you heard back from my lawyer?" I smiled at his lovely smiling wife and replied, "Unfortunately, not yet. My lawyer is eagerly awaiting the trial to hear Rebecca and you under oath, and believe me, he can be very harsh." The smile disappeared from his wife's face, and she asked me, "Why, Rebecca?" "Don't ask me, ask him. He knows." I really enjoyed that conversation. Rebecca came back to me and asked, "What did you say to Gunder's wife that upset her so much?" "You know that bastard Gunder?" "Don't be stupid. What did you say to her?" I smiled at Rebecca and answered her question. "I didn't say anything to her. Your friend Gunder threatened to take me to court, and I told him that my lawyer was looking forward to hearing him testify under oath in court. That's the honest truth, and I don't see why she should be upset if he has nothing to hide. Or do you believe he's involved in some kind of dirty business?" "My God, he was just joking with you. Has he agreed to forget about the incident?" I looked her straight in the eye and asked, "How much did it cost you?" If you gave him something, it was completely pointless because you can be sure that that fucking cowardly bastard wouldn't dare do anything to me. Of course I didn't give him anything. What do you take me for? Before I could answer, several people approached us and greeted Rebecca politely, and I pretended to be a happy and polite husband for a moment. Then a guy with a big smile came up to us, shook my hand, and then hugged Rebecca and congratulated her. When he left, I asked her, "Who was that?" "Jerry Silvergren." Now I knew who he was. He was her lover, the owner of the BMW with 4 flat tires. I said to Rebecca, "Silvergren, I've heard a lot of rumors about him. They say he's a successful womanizer who can't resist any office bimbo. You're probably his favorite, and he's probably tried all his dirty tricks on you. Am I right?" Rebecca stared at me and replied sharply, "Are you completely out of your mind today? What's wrong with you?" I feel sorry for that bastard's wife and kids, I really do, because being cheated on must be hell. I feel sorry that you have to share your long days and even some of your evenings with disgusting guys like Nielsberg and Silvergren. It was true, and I really meant it. Rebecca turned pale. She wasn't stupid and probably began to fear that I knew something about these 2 men. But before she could say anything, her boss, who had invited Rebecca to the table, led her away. As the husband of the guest of honor, I sat to the left of the boss's wife, which meant that I had to thank the hosts on behalf of the guests. The boss's wife was a frivolous woman, and we chatted cheerfully about everyday matters until she asked, "Are you happy that your wife is getting a nice company car on Monday?" I noticed that several people around us were waiting for my answer when I replied, "Why should I be happy? I have 3 company cars of my own, and I'm not interested in hers." She tried again. "But you must agree that she'll be happy with the raise." "It's not good for me either, because Rebecca wants us to live separately, and I earn enough to cover all my needs and expenses." Now she said, so that only I could hear, "I didn't mean to offend you. I'm sorry if I did." "No, you didn't offend me. Our friends and acquaintances know that we live separately." Finally, it was time for speeches. Only the 2 of us were on the list. Her boss spoke first, praising Rebecca in every way and wishing her luck in her new position. Then it was my turn, and sitting next to the hostess, I had to thank the hosts for the dinner on behalf of the guests. I did very well. I knew that everything would depend on me, and Julia had prepared me to say everything correctly and in the right order, which seemed to be a pleasant surprise for Rebecca, who clearly did not expect such skills from me. Then I continued, "Since most of you are meeting me for the first time, I would like to say a few words on behalf of the family of your new colleague, Rebecca Larson." Her boss nodded, and I continued, "I must admit that we, her family, envy you, the office staff, for seeing so many more wonderful and bright sides of Rebecca in a single day than we do in a whole week. Of course, I understand that it takes a lot of hard work to achieve such success, but something is wrong if you have to spend 10, 12, 14, or 16 hours a day at work or dealing with work issues." I noticed that people were starting to look at me and continued, "I'm not one to complain, but when our old dog was hurt during one of her work meetings at our house, it was too much for me. The smart dog showed me what had happened, and I became interested in Rebecca's work with Mr. Nielsberg. I'm even ashamed to say that she worked overtime with Mr. Silvergren, gathering information for investors in a dark room at the infamous Ritz Hotel in the next town. And I know, dear wife, that the only people in that dark room were Mr. Silvergren and you didn't come home until 11 o'clock at night. I even know that Mr. Nielsberg kicked our dog while you were having sex in our guest room. But I don't care that you work for that damn scandalous company, because today I filed for divorce." In a matter of seconds, a lovely dinner turned into a real scandal. Rebecca was in shock, stood up and screamed, "No, no, no!" Silvergren yelled at me about the 4 flat tires, and his wife cried loudly. Nielsberg's wife screamed and yelled at her husband. I got up from the table, left the dining room, and called Julia on her cell phone. "Everything's ready. I'm leaving." She had promised to give me a ride after dinner and was already waiting for me outside the hotel. She was probably afraid that I would go to a bar and do something stupid if I took a taxi. I saw her car as soon as I left the building. I told her, "I did it. I did what I had to do, but I can't say I'm proud of myself." She replied, "I understand." When we entered her apartment, she poured me a glass of whiskey and said, "Just tell me what you want. Do you want to be alone or talk about it?" "I'd rather talk." I told her everything that had happened before dinner and during dinner. She listened without interrupting, and at the end I asked her, "I'm ashamed of what I did, and I really hope you don't think I'm a savage." She looked at me and said quietly, "No, I don't believe that, because I know how painful it is to be deceived, and I respect you for having the courage to do what you did. Of course, it was unpleasant, but in my opinion, cheating is much worse." We talked for a long time before going to bed. Julia was going to sleep in her daughter Mireille's room and offered me her bed, but in the end, we both ended up in her bed. Nothing happened during the night, and after breakfast, it was time for me to leave. Julia promised to drive me home. When we were ready, she smiled at me and said, "I forgot to tell you yesterday that your new suit is very nice, and you can wear it if you want to have a small wedding when you find a new woman." I smiled back and said, "That depends on whether you'll help me organize the wedding." "Organize the wedding? Isn't that the bride's job?" "Yes." She laughed and replied, "Don't joke about such serious matters." I didn't need to say anything else because we both knew that this issue would come back to us in much more serious circumstances. When I got home, Rebecca was sitting at the kitchen table. She greeted me with a shout. "You bastard! Are you happy now?" "No." "Why did you do this to me?" "Because you cheated on me. If my love wasn't enough for you, you should have divorced me instead of acting like a whore." She yelled at me, "Was it really necessary to turn my promotion into a damn scandal?" "Yes. It was necessary because many of these people obviously knew about your habits and believed that I was a poor clown with a promiscuous wife. Please remember that I offered to divorce you when we had a big fight a few years ago because of your numerous parties." Rebecca looked at me with sad eyes and said, "I didn't want a divorce then, and I don't want one now." "Did you really believe that I would agree to a wife who sleeps with perverts like Nilsberg and Silvergren? How many more were there?" "No one else. I was only with Silvergren once. Never with Nilsberg?" I got angry. "You're a lying bitch. You can be sure that my lawyer will demand a DNA test from Gunder Nilsberg in court if you don't agree to my terms." She started crying, and after a while she burst into tears. "No, please don't do that. I admit that our sex during lunch in the guest room got out of control. He went crazy and almost raped me. You're right. Gunder hit the barking dog and somehow got it out of the room. Dear Lucas, I promise that these 2 instances of infidelity are my only terrible mistakes. Please forgive me." 2, 20, or 200 times. It doesn't matter when even one instance of infidelity in our unhappy marriage was one too many. Of course, I had many questions about why she had cheated on me and when it had started, but I didn't expect honest answers at that moment. I gave her a copy of the divorce papers and said, "This house is my private property, so I want you to move out as soon as possible. You can take all the furniture and almost everything else except for the electronics and my art collection." She went into the bathroom and locked the door. I realized that any further negotiations would have to be postponed until she calmed down and came to terms with the situation. I had a lot to do, and that took up the whole Saturday. To my relief, Rebecca wasn't home when I returned. After a quick shower, I headed over to Julia's place. I suggested we go out on Saturday night, but she insisted on making dinner because, she said, we needed to talk. Without a doubt, Julia and I were friends, very good friends. But I was worried about whether she wanted to take our relationship to the next level. I knew she was happy with her job, and must understand that a relationship with a boss could turn into a trap if things went wrong. Would she dare to take that risk? Nevertheless, I rang her doorbell with a large bouquet of red roses and a bottle of fine wine. When she opened the door, she was wearing a beautiful dress, and her hair was done. She asked, "What are all these beautiful roses for?" "Because you've been a wonderful friend to me during difficult times, and I really hope we can stay close or even become closer. Julia, you're the most amazing girl I know." She smiled at me before saying, "You really want sex? You've been single for less than 24 hours and you're already chasing skirts." I can only refer to the old saying, "Pretty girls prefer bad boys," and I'll regret it for the rest of my life if I don't try something to win the girl of my dreams. Even if you suggest going somewhere hot, I'll feel better knowing that at least I tried. But what about my job if I ask you to go somewhere hot? Nothing will happen. I swear and promise. She laughed and said, "Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there an old saying, 'Naughty boys sleep with pretty girls'?" "Yes, I've even heard that version." She continued laughing. "Do you really understand that I'm the most dangerous woman you could date if you're trying to use dirty tricks to sleep with me?" She was right. It is well known that sexual harassment of female employees is very costly and has led to the bankruptcy of some small business owners with perverted instincts. I looked at her, smiled, and asked, "Do you have yellow and red cards like soccer referees?" A yellow card means a warning, a red card means you're out, and 2 yellow cards mean a red card. Do I really need them? No. Now she hugged me, kissed me quickly, and said I was a very desirable gentleman. We had a pleasant evening, talking a lot about what we wanted and expected from the future. To my great delight, we had only minor disagreements on most issues. We talked until 3 in the morning, and there was no sex, even though we were both sleeping in her bed. On Monday, we told Elias and Thomas that we were dating, and they said it was good and a great idea. It took Julia and me 2 weeks before we had sex, but after a romantic dinner at a nice restaurant, we couldn't resist the temptation any longer. It was true love, and it was wonderful. Now we were a real couple. Although I didn't expect it to happen, Nilsberg and Silvergren's wives filed for divorce. Gunder Nilsberg got a new job and moved out of town, while Silvergren stayed at his old job. Rebecca agreed to the divorce and didn't cause any problems. Despite the scandal at the dinner party, she kept her job and performed well, soon regaining the respect of her colleagues. 2 weeks after the dinner party celebrating my promotion, she moved out of my house, and 2 months later she married a very wealthy man. Julia's daughter Mireille got along well with me and my children, so Julia and I are planning to have a baby and get married as soon as my divorce is finalized. I was glad to hear that Rebecca and my children were getting along very well with her new husband. He became a real soccer dad, participating in their activities. To my surprise, he called me at work and invited me to the pub for a beer, saying that he preferred to share his children's interests in sports and education rather than bribe them with expensive gifts. He then seemed concerned when he said that Rebecca probably still hoped I would take her back and asked if I had any such intentions. I replied that there was no question of that, but that it would be great if Rebecca, Julia, he and I could maintain a good relationship for the sake of the children. A month later, the 4 of us met to discuss issues concerning the children, and everything went surprisingly well, with no hard feelings on the part of Rebecca or Julia. To my great satisfaction, we were able to reach a similar agreement with Mireille's father and his new wife. We had to accept that life in our time meant the emergence of new types of families.